let's start with, really this seemingly simple term gua sha and unveil some of its complexity.
Okay. Um, and it's such a big subject, which is why I pause, because it's presented in such a way that it's a few strokes on the face, and suddenly, miraculously, something happens. Maybe people use the term sculpting, lifting, um, and this is where the term gua sha has been kind of like marketed, but purposely marketed. So if we go back and we have a look, wow, what is this? Where did it come from? Which is what I did. And then you start to see, well, hang on, why is this technique even in the beauty world? First of all, how did it get there? And because it's such a rich technique that was used. It, it's difficult to know exactly when it started because there are all kinds of in Chinese, there's all kinds of like theories about where it comes from, and you can kind of jump around, and you can say, oh, it comes from like 1,000 years ago. It comes from this emperor, but there's no evidence for anything. So if we have to start, well, where is the evidence? Where does it come from? And we can kind of have a look at some solid stuff. There's a book written in 1675 by Gua Sha Show, and this book was all about treating people who had the plague, inverted commas, plague. And really, what they were really treating was perhaps cholera, because the actual character for Sha is cholera, and that when you see Gua Sha in Chinese, it means it looks like scrape and cholera, put them together, and that's Gua Sha. And that's where it really comes from. And he wrote this text about fighting cholera with Gua Sha, and he was amazingly successful. And it,
And cholera was a bacteria, if or no.
well, it's difficult to know whether it really was cholera, but the character is cholera. But what they were referring to was a febrile disease.
Okay.
So it's difficult to know exactly, but purely because of that character as cholera, it's like, well, he's treating something like cholera. Perhaps it's typhoid. It was difficult to know exactly, but they kind of called it the plague. And the book is not in English; it's in Chinese. But he talks about these fascinating things. They talk about like when this plague came, people's hair went white overnight, and they had a few days of life, and then they just died. So we're talking like something amazingly like serious. And other times they talk about, well, the practitioner of Gua Sha, which was probably him. They came to like one neighbor and treated him. This is using Gua Sha on their back, and they described it as the body flushed out, so presumably diarrhea and all kinds of things coming out the body. And that person survived, and then talks about, well, they went to their neighbor the following day and they were dead because they didn't have the Gua Sha treatment at that time because the neighbors got it at the same time. So they were talking about life.
That's a randomized controlled trial.
It's pretty good, and
Yeah.
it was pretty much like life and death. This is where Gua
Yeah.
Sha was coming from, and the
Wow.
reason it wasn't like such a major, well-known treatment in Chinese medicine was purely because this was all happening in the poor areas. This was in the villages, in the rural areas. And in the more kind of urban areas and the places where the elite lived, that would be acupuncture, that would be a herbal medicine, and that would be cupping, and that would be the things which are cleaner. So Gua Sha was really kind of in the dirt. It was in the, it was amongst the uneducated, and it was passed down on a female lineage, which is absolutely fascinating. It wasn't a male technique; it was a female technique, which has been kind of like totally blanked out. But if you go into the history, you'll see, and there's a quote talking about how the women in one village, they knew far more than the doctor that came there, who wanted to treat the people who were sick. And it was like the skill of the women in the village was so good with Gua Sha in treating febrile disease. So it was basically the Gua Sha was to treat heat in the body and to remove heat from the body. And there's all kinds of theories of why it would do that. But that's really where it comes from. So everything is coming from that. And so, when you see
Wow.
this kind of like scraping stuff and people saying, well, that's gua sha, it's like, is it really? Is that really?
Yeah, yeah,
Can you
yeah.
can you use the word gua sha for that?
We've come a long way from treating life and death to,
Yeah.
really people who are
Lifting your
like,
cheeks.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but then but
It's a
then
big leap.
it is. But then then I researched, well, where does facial gua sha come from? When is there a certain time? Is there a place? Is there a person that it really came from? So I spent time researching and having a look, see, was it in China or was it in another place? And eventually, I kind of worked out that it was like the late 1990s, and it was actually Japanese lady
Uh-huh.
who actually studied in China and brought it back, who happened to work for Shiseido, and this is really where the whole face beauty idea came from. There was some experimentation in China at that time, but nothing big. And it was just a kind of application of how you might treat the body on the face. And there's always been a facial treatment with gua sha, but it's normally about scarring and to remove facial scarring, and it's very very painful. Also for Bell's palsy, so when one side of the face is it doesn't have any feeling, then there's a really strong treatment. It's very very painful, and so there has been that. But along came facial gua sha, and
Clive, can I just
yeah,
interrupt with a question? Where does the pain come from?
the pain
When
of
you
the
say
pain
the
of yeah, the
yeah,
pain of the
you say
treatment.
the
That
treatment,
is
yeah,
that is that is like you might be aware of like the facial gua sha right now is this nice smooth movement, but the
yeah.
pain is traditionally there's a lot of pain with gua sha because you don't get the smoothest tool. You basically get what looks like a horn, or even like a shell, like a big shell from the beach, but like a giant one, and you'll be holding it with two hands and you'll be scraping, and it's pretty sharp, so it doesn't break
Wow.
the skin,
Okay.
but it's not designed to be a pleasant treatment, because why should it be a pleasant treatment? You're trying to save someone's life.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't care if it hurts, it doesn't matter, because
yeah,
like
yeah,
there's the and so with that kind of philosophy, it's like when you're treating Bell's palsy, it doesn't matter if it hurts, because we want that feeling to come back. And so if it
yeah,
hurts a little bit, suffer. It's very much an Asian medical viewpoint. It's like suffering is part of getting better.
yeah,
Us in the West are a bit more sensitive. We
yeah,
don't
yeah,
like
yeah.
to inflict pain on ourselves, but of course not everyone, but you'll find there's very much a tradition in many countries in the Far East and in Southeast Asia of well, there's going to be some pain involved, and I'll take it, with what's going to happen. And so that's that. So facial gua sha really it kind of just jumped out, and people saw gua sha, they saw the movements, and they actually saw the tool, which actually came from the woman who works for Shiseido, and it was a very basic tool just to kind of scrape like that. And then they got all confused about, well, what is this thing? There was no theory behind it. No one came out and just said, well, look, this is gua sha, and this is the theory behind it. Partly because the gua sha theory in China is pretty bad. It hasn't developed like the other areas of Chinese medicine, and so it kind of lacks a lot of stuff. It's there, but people have kind of like jumped over it and tried to standardize everything in Chinese medicine. So certainly in terms of
I did a little bit of research, and I've seen there are some efforts to try to understand, some of the underlying mechanisms, but it does seem like early days compared with the other fields.
Well, yeah. Well, basically, what most of the explanations about how gua sha work, they pretty much they can be applied to acupuncture, they can be applied to cupping, they can be applied to most of the other things. Anything that's a manual treatment, which might either affect the nervous system, or might affect the fascia, and also might also affect how the body catalyzes, and how for example, the bruising that happens after gua sha. Well, gua sha, you're using a tool on the skin. There'll be some marks on the skin, some red marks. Normally not on the face, but on the neck there would be, and on the body, all over the body. And that's a natural process of something that happens inside the body, in the fascia and in the soft tissue. And that part is it kind of has the same effect as bruising might do, in that a certain enzyme comes out, heme oxygenase number one, which will then help the body start to heal this area, and which will then encourage anti-inflammatory cytokines to come, and those will have an effect on the local area, but also on a circulatory aspect. And so there's lots of research looking at that, which is kind of like connected with heat. It's always connected with heat because probably the way to explain Gua Sha and the effects is pretty much normally connected with inflammation. And if you go back to the history, the reason it's there is because it was fighting febrile disease. It fights heat, and so inflammation is of course a form of heat. And so if you really want to see really what's Gua Sha about, you've got to follow the heat, because that's essentially what's going on, and it's the one thing that you can test a lot easier than the other things. And certainly, if you're actually treating people, or if you're actually seeing things or experiencing it, the heat is the one thing you're going to know. Other things you might not know. You might not know changes in your tissue. You're not going to feel them, but you're going to feel that heat. If the heat is gone, then you're going to know it. So it's a great way of understanding how Gua Sha works. But also, it is the main way that the best way, really, that certainly in terms of Western medicine and Chinese medicine, because they actually meet together. And where they meet together is heat. Well, in fact, my whole argument is that Chinese medicine and Western medicine, there is no Chinese medicine and Western medicine. It's basically
There's just medicine. Yeah.
they're both understandings of nature and the natural
Yeah.
world, and they're both trying to make sense of the natural world, coming up with different ideas and different forms of thinking. But they're talking about the natural world. So if you just go into the natural world and you start to like look at the natural world, then that's it. You don't need to worry about, well, is this a Chinese medicine viewpoint? Is this a Western medicine viewpoint? It's the natural world.
Yeah.
But it's essentially this is essentially what, if we bypass the 20th century of Chinese medicine, because stuff happened in the 20th century that changed Chinese medicine. There was the revolution, and there were lots of changes in the 1950s, 1960s, and they developed something called traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, which is what everyone knows Chinese medicine kind of now. If you study in the States, if you study any form of Chinese medicine, you're going to study TCM mostly, and this is the kind of hybrid new version of Chinese medicine, which doesn't bear any much relationship to really what Chinese medicine was before. And it's a kind of combination between Western medicine and Chinese medicine. Put them together, it was kind of like, well, let's find a diagnosis, let's find the name of the diagnosis, pretty much like in Western medicine, and let's get some treatments for it. And instead of taking pills, you've got like acupuncture points, this point, this point, this point's for a headache, or or whatever, this area, this, it's all connected with the illness, and these are the solutions for that illness, which is not really Chinese
Understood.
medicine.
Yeah.
It never
Yeah.
was Chinese medicine, because Chinese medicine was always kind of, well, let's have a look and see what's going on in this body, and let's find
Yeah.
out what's going on, and how to change it. That was it.
Yeah.
There's no like, the point. In fact,
Disease ICD-9 codes, right? Didn't exist.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so this whole idea about what we kind of understand of Chinese medicine now, it's a bit, it's kind of warped out of what it was before. So, for example, you might know, might be aware of some of these points on the body. The points on the body were never a focus. If you go back to the Huangdi Neijing, which is the original text of Chinese medicine, which is something like 2,000 years old. And well, the great thing about living in modern times, 21st century, all of the text of the Huangdi Neijing is on a computer, and you can read the stuff, and which makes life so much easier, because before you couldn't, or
Yeah.
before it was a lot more difficult. And so I've spent quite a long time with Huangdi Neijing, looking at and working out on stuff, and many other people have as well. And so when you realize what were they saying at that time, 2,000 years ago, and what they're saying now is totally different. And so,
Yeah.
when we talk about how Gua Sha works, and we can talk about the circulatory system, we can talk about how microcirculation increases. So if you scrape something on the skin, and then underneath the skin, the pressure underneath the skin in the capillaries, that's going to increase the microcirculation, which is the circulation of the capillary action, of the tissue bed. and that itself is is part of the general circulation of the body, which actually, so that the Chinese would actually see that as the river system, and they actually would take you down to a river, and they'd look at the streams and a river in a valley, and they'd look at all the streams coming down the mountain and onto the main river at the bottom, and they'd be explaining, well, you see this river here, that is the main artery in your arm, for example. You see all these streams coming down, they're the capillaries coming down through the tissue. You see that forest, that's the main muscle structures and the facial structures. And what they were doing, they were just looking at nature, but they weren't just imagining kind of like, oh, this is like this. They were looking at what is the patterns that affect this nature. And those patterns that affect this nature are the same patterns that might affect what's in your body, because they're formed in the same pattern. It's not to say your muscle is a forest. Of course, it's not. But there are certain patterns in the way that it works in the environment of a valley, that mirrors the patterns of how it works in the body. And the one symbol they were using in Huangdi Neijing all the time, for example, for muscle, they were using tree all the time. It was always about trees, well, in particular bamboo, because bamboo is firm and very flexible. And it was like, if you want good muscles, the muscle structures have to be good. They must be firm and flexible. And so it was this kind of combination of nature and an understanding about the body, that really kind of really comes out from the ancient Chinese. And the big thing was that they did autopsies in 2,000 years ago, and they actually wrote in great detail about it, as the prisoners were executed, and so some of those prisoners were donated to people who were researching the body, and they used to take out the organs, they used to weigh them, they used to take very long reeds, and they used to push the reeds into the arteries and to see where they went, and on the other big blood vessels. And so they were exploring the body in this kind of way 2,000 years ago. And from this knowledge, this is how they kind of understood, well, the inside the body kind of works like the rest of nature, because of course it's part of nature.
It makes sense. Yeah.
But of course,
It
we've
makes
got the problem now, is that what Chinese medicine now calls this wonderful idea about the rivers, they just call them energetic meridians, which is like, it's crazy. And
it's a
it
real
wasn't what they
abstraction. Yeah.
it wasn't what they said. And this all comes
Yeah.
back to one man. It's Georges Soulier de Meuron. He was a diplomat in the between 1900 and 1916 in Shanghai, and he used to work for the French embassy. And he was fascinated by the Chinese culture around him, and especially Chinese medicine. And so he supposedly spoke fluent Chinese. He translated a couple of books, and he brought them back to France, and in Paris he published them. And these were the first major books in the West. They were published in French, and he made certain mistakes in the way he translated it. And one of the things, there's this wonderful word called qi. You might have come across it before.
Yes. Yes.
QI. And so, if you really want to know what qi is, it's basically, you need to go into astrophysics. It's the fabric of space time. That's what they were talking about. Fabric of space time in exactly the same way as astrophysics. But what he translated it as was energy. And this was the complete disaster for understanding what was going on. So
And
suddenly, the Chinese medicine.
it's not such a bad translation. It's just wrong.
Yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
appropriate to
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
it should be, because of course there's,
Yeah.
it changed the future of what they were talking about, by using that. And the other word, he instead of translating like rivers, he translated it as meridians, because that made more sense in French. And so we had these translations, that kind of
Amazing.
became the future of Chinese medicine. And if they hadn't,
Amazing.
and that's why now people are just talking about energetic meridians which are flowing in your body. And what they should have been talking about, well, actually, they're talking about exactly the same blood vessels as you know. If you cut open, you're going to see them. It's the arteries, it's the veins, it's the venules, it's the capillaries. But what they're talking about is they're talking about what's inside the blood. They're talking about more complicated stuff that's inside there. So it kind of takes away all this mystery and brings it kind of together much closer to what Western medicine is talking about.
That's
Um,
that's such a important. I'm glad you took time to lead us through that because otherwise it just, what you've just done is you've rooted, you've rooted these concepts back. You've given them their roots and their perspectives rather than seeing them as some sort of, arbitrary interpretation, abstractions.
yeah, and
Yeah.
this is the big problem, isn't it?
There's no abstraction. It's just miscommunication. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I
Go
want
ahead.
to take us back to this lady at Shiseido, a company for whom I have for a company for which I have tremendous respect. Um, and so she introduced this idea of using gua sha techniques for the face.
Yeah,
And
they produced. There was a certain tool. It's like what's it called now? A wing shape. So it's like
okay,
a triangular shape.
yes, yes,
That came out from her. And she wrote a couple of books, and I remember them. And it became really popular in Japan, and then like 2 years later, suddenly books appeared in China in Chinese, and suddenly
okay.
it was like a competition going on then.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And like in your experience, right? As we've seen, you're deeply educated in this matter. And so once you sort of saw this application for beauty purposes for the face, you, I'm sure, knowing you a little bit, you investigated it very intensely. And tell us about that. Tell us about what you found when you were taking these techniques that you were using to heal people, and now you're applying it to for aesthetic purposes. What did
Mm.
you discover?
Well, yeah. So it's all really about principles. So the idea is like, what are the principles behind a treatment for the body? And if you can kind of work out what those principles are, you can just apply those same principles to the face in exactly the same way, because it's not really the separation of like beauty and health. It's the same thing. Because if you're unhealthy, you're not going to look beautiful.
No,
And so,
that's
you know,
well put. Well
yeah.
put. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's really an extension. So it's basically the same principle. And the main principle is, and I explain it, I can't explain it in great detail now because I explain it in my books. I have to go into there's a lot of like physics to explain like Chinese medicine, and particularly astrophysics, and you need to talk about how stars move, and how the structure
Wow.
of stars. And so this is the place I always start with to try and work out, well, where does it all come from. And it's really about this is another big misunderstanding about yin and yang. Lots of people understand yin and yang as a kind of superficial kind of like, I don't know, people talk about yin yoga and stuff like that, and people have got an idea of yin yang, that single the symbol. But what they don't really understand is that it's basically, you need to go into the universe and understand, well, how does a black hole work? How does a star, certain stars which are variable in their movements. We could just go to like Orion, for example. If you're familiar with looking at the night sky and you see Orion, there's Orion Nebula. A nebula is wonderful because a nebula is basically it's a factory of creating stars. New stars come out of nebulas. They just create stars, and if you see images, you just see lots of new stars coming out. We can see it in the night sky wherever you are. You should be able to see it, and it's the only one we can see. And so the nebula is this wonderful collection of gases, and those gases are subject to gravity, and gravity will, of course, push everything towards the center, and that creates heat, and that heat will create an outwards push, which will create kind of tension inside. And then, of course, that tension comes to a certain place, and it can no longer hold the tension. It collapses. There's a nuclear explosion, and boom, you have a star. And this is how a nebula works, and it's so beautiful. But basically, the ancient Chinese understood that, and they understood, well, this is yin and yang, and yin is purely the contractive action of nature, and yang is the expansive action of nature. And that's all they are. There's nothing mystical about them. There's no, you don't need to meditate on them. That's it. They're part of physics. They're part of like the laws of physics. That's it. And so when you understand that, you start to think, well, okay, how do you kind of treat someone treat their skin or treat their tissue under the skin? Well, gua sha is all about treating the tissue, not the skin, and it's all about giving the tissue space to breathe. And so that means increasing circulation, because I'm sure everyone knows that if you have like a sore neck, it's really hard. You touch it and it's hard, because the
Yeah.
muscles are contracted, and that affects the circulation system, and it affects the small capillaries. They're not flowing. The blood's just not flowing as it should be in that area, and
It
so the whole.
squeezes them.
Yes, yes, and so of course it's flowing, but it's just not flowing as it should do, and so what in terms of like what you do to the tissue, you create space, you allow it to expand, and it contracts and expands, it contracts and expands. But when it's stuck like that, it can't. It's just like stuck. So what you're doing, you're introducing what I term in my books yin yang motion, and that's the motion of the universe. There's nothing mysterious about it. It's purely an expansive and contractive motion which exists in nature, and you bring it back into the body and allows the microcirculation to increase. And so when you start to see principles like that, that's the principle of gua sha. That's what gua sha does. And then you can like start to think, oh, how is that applied to the face? Imagine if we bring motion, the kind of expansive, contractive motion to the face, and you start to think, well, okay, well, most people that want some kind of treatment in the forehead area, there's some kind of problem with contraction. There's too much tension there. It's the place where people have Botox in this area here to try and stop the lines, and the lines are coming because it's very tense. And you think, well, if we bring this principle of expansion and contraction into the tissue, then how can we do that here? And the idea would be then, okay, well, perhaps we can treat here, but then it would be a mistake to then think, well, I'm just going to treat here and that's all fine. But you've got to understand, well, this part here, the frontalis muscle is directly connected right here to the glea aponeurotica membrane, which is going over here, which is pulling it, and which is directly connected to the occipitalis at the back here, which is then becoming the fascia, coming to the nuchal fascia, coming all the way down the back, and we can follow it. We can actually follow it all the way down. And so if you don't start changing the tension here, you can't possibly bring back this kind of expansive and contractive motion here. And so you start to understand, well, how is the body fixed? Because the face isn't by itself. It's directly connected both in movement and in circulation with the rest of the body. And so this is how you start to apply the principles to the face. You start to realize, well, obviously this part here must be connected with whatever you're going to do. The neck and the back of the neck and shoulders, the back. If there's something restricting in terms of movement of fascia, then it's going to restrict here too. And so when you're coming to the lower face, well, and this is a whole different thing going on here, because this area is not tense. We want to bring tension back here normally. Well, then you've got to start thinking, well, hang on, this is the movements are going to be very much on the front here, and it's very much going to be the chest area and coming down the abdomen, and so you start to
Interesting.
understand, well, hang on, each part of the face is directly connected on a very physical level with another part of the body, or basically a whole line of the body. And this actually matches very well a lot of the ideas from the Huangdi Neijing, which is kind of like, if you're familiar with these meridian lines, they're not what you think they are. They're actually interconnected fascia groups based on the movement. And if we could study the movement, we'd have to look at flowers, and this is the best way to study the movement. And so this is what I did, and when I teach, I spend a lot of time talking about the movement of flowers, because on the movement of trees, because this is how you understand how the body works, because it's the same pattern of nature that is affecting our bodies and the trees and plants, because it's the same thing going on around us.
Unbelievable. Clive, let me ask you, how important is the neck in terms of the appearance of the face?
Oh my
I
goodness,
know
yeah.
that's sort of
Because
a
no, no, but I
simple
mean,
question. Yeah.
virtually everything, all of these kind of like patterns which are interconnected, they all go through the neck, all of them. And so, pretty much whatever's going on in the body is coming through the neck in some way. And so the neck is the place where you're going to like make changes, and also it's where you're going to see stuff, which is interconnected with both the face and the body. And you know, I mean, just think about in terms of blood vessels. I mean, you've got a pretty major blood vessels coming through there, but also in terms of the structure. We're talking about the muscle structures and some of the fascia coming along there. They're all directly interconnected with a certain movement of the body, which is directly connected to what I would term into a valley system, because for me they're valley systems. I understand, like when you know, if you talk about, for example, let's give you an example is, you know, if I want to talk about the brachial artery which is coming here, and then switches to the radial artery, and then you can follow them, you know, you can just see so clearly if you see where the arteries are, you know, it comes right across there. The ancient Chinese understood this because they did autopsies, but they didn't understand, you know, the same names in the same way. They just described this, well, this is called the lung river, and that they just, because it comes roughly from here, which is like where the lungs are, and so this is what they call the lung river, which comes all the way, they connect it all the way down to your thumb. And what in TCM now they will call it the lung meridian, which is like this energetic magical line flowing across here, but it's not really, it's actually the arteries which we can see so clearly, flowing along here. So that will be the lung. Now, this will be, I would call this the valley, because I see it as a valley system. And because it's not just the artery, it's kind of, it's a vascular bundle. So it's the artery and it's the nerve which is coming around the artery all the way. So it's the nervous system as well. But it's also the fascia which is around that and the muscles which are around that. So this is how I see the kind of valley, in the it's basically the higher up you go towards the skin level, you're basically following a valley, and it's organized in a very smart way. And so that would be, for example, for me, that would be a valley system. So I this is how I see the blood circulation system, and how I would see, like in TCM, the energetic meridians. I just see them as there's organized valleys based on movements of the body, and also how the structure of how the nervous system works, because you have to understand everything via the nervous system as well as the circulatory system, as well as the lymphatic system. um, and um, and so valley system is like, I, you know, finally after many years, it finally is that, yes, this is it. And then my last book, I got everything down there as the valley, and I showed the valley and how it works. But it's just a way of like interpreting really complicated, the human body is infinitely complicated.
Yeah,
But
complicated architectural concepts.
yeah,
And you just mentioned the lymphatic system, right?
yeah,
Which is, if you take a influencer view of Gua Sha, that's the only system that they
yeah,
really talk about. But but if I were to interpret what you were saying, the lymphatic system is just another of these channels that is running through the valleys, along with the nerves, along with the
that's it,
blood
that's
vessels.
it.
It's just another wire, um,
Perfect.
that's
That's
going.
exactly what it is. So,
Yeah.
I mean, in whatever 25 years of doing Chinese medicine, I never once thought of the lymphatic system, purely because it's not a separate system within the Chinese medicine viewpoint, because it's already built in. And so, if you're increasing circulation, blood circulation, you're increasing fluids as well. And so, there was no point in like going into that area, because it's already covered, as you already said. It's already in the valley.
And so, you know, we talked about creating space, right? Creating space for these systems to operate properly, right? To
Yeah,
sort of not be bunched up, not
yeah,
be kinked. And once you create the space, right, and you have restore homeostasis, um, you have improvements in all the tissues, right? They're
oh,
all
absolutely.
going to be like, if you think of the tissues as the plants in the valley, right? They're all going to
That's it.
thrive more effectively, right? So
Perfect. Yeah,
yeah, you're going to have the muscle will restore itself, easier. the fat tissue is going to be regenerating more effectively. The skin will be, which sits on top of those systems, will be able to regenerate itself more effectively. It's sort of the result of homeostasis, space, everything flowing, you know, properly. Um, that makes a lot of sense.
That's perfect. Yeah, it's universal principles, and these are universal principles, and what you're saying is exactly right. And this is why for me it's so important to see the valley, because
Yeah,
that's one way that we can really understand. Like, because if you make a change to a valley where there's a problem in the river flow, if the river flow has like dried up, then of course the valley is going to change completely, because the meadows are not going to be, it won't have flowers, and the trees won't have that many leaves. But you increase the flow of the water in the valley, and of course, everything in the valley thrives, which is
yeah.
exactly what you're saying.
It's funny how um, this aligns so well with what we always tell people because I'm always surprised in my Adipo business where people are obsessed with the right application of the products. Do I leave it on for 10 minutes? How do I wash it off? Is washing it off with water versus, just taking a tissue? They're obsessed because the industry has made them obsessed with this minutia. And
Mm,
I say, like, wait a second, go back. 90% of your appearance, or, maybe I have to revise that to 99% now after this talk. 99% of your appearance is going to be a result of how healthy you are in general, right? You
yes.
know, what is your body composition like? How much tension are you dealing with? How well are you sleeping? Those are the things that you really should focus on as the root causes of, as you said at the beginning, there's no difference between health and beauty. Lack of health manifests as, imperfections or defects in aesthetics. So yeah, so this completely aligns with that, with that understanding that, because some people will say, well, we've tried this and it's not working. And then I ask them, okay, what is your diet like? How often are you exercising? Is there a lot of stress in your life? And then we generally find something that, people say, yeah, you know what? I have um, I have an allergy, you know, that where you have, chronic inflammation. Well, let's
It
let's
becomes
maybe
really obvious.
yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes really obvious. And this is after many months of, sort of dealing with the surface, the minutia, and then we learned that person developed a allergy in her 40s, and then as a result developed weak skin under the eyes, which you can understand if she had, chronic inflammation under the eyes, it will weaken the skin. And
Absolutely.
yeah. So Clive, tell us, I know you have I've spoken to you about this before, but you have this is, I love how you take all the mystery out of these practices. And even though you've invested decades, literally, in understanding this through your books, through your courses, you make these principles accessible to, everyday people. And I
Yes.
know you've invested a lot of time. So tell me about how a normal person like myself could learn how to treat themselves or treat someone else uh, 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 with your
Hmm.
interpretation and
Yeah. Yeah.
of these ancient methods.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is a big thing for me, and it's following the tradition of Gua Sha. And I mentioned about some of the books in the 17th century, and there was after that book that I already mentioned in the 17th century, and also a little bit in the 18th century, they began writing books, and some of these books, well, quite a few of these books, were actually manuals for self treatment. So this is
Oh,
really
wow.
where Gua Sha comes from. And yeah, I've got some of these manuals for self-treatment, and there are various quotes that I can give that it was so important for some of these doctors, that this was a technique which is what didn't belong to them. It belonged to like the people. It belonged to the villagers, and it was important for them that they did the treatments and that they didn't need to have this expert come along. And so this is very much following Gua Sha, and this is the reason why it's part of what I do, really. And also, I kind of go against, and I have gone against the kind of the stream of like where Gua Sha's going. It's very much certainly it started off in the West with very much protecting Gua Sha and just saying, well, no, you can only do Gua Sha if you're an acupuncturist or a Chinese medicine expert, and there was very much a protection of that, and so I was going against that for many years, and I think the world's finally caught up a little bit. And also sometimes in TCM they don't really, it's not the tradition of it, but you have to go back, and when you see this is where Gua Sha comes from, it belongs to the people of villages. They developed it, they passed it down, the ancestry. There's a technique called kerakam, which is in Indonesia, which is a scraping technique, and they went to a village in Java, and they were asking, well, how did you learn this technique? And they asked one old lady, and she was explaining, well, my grandmother taught me. And they said, well, who taught her? Her grandmother taught her. And then and they were talking about, well, this is where it came from. It wasn't written down. It was just taught. They scraped and they explained it down the female line, and the female treated everyone. And so my books, all of my books really have been kind of always aimed at the a general reader, not restricted only for inverted commas experts, because I think everyone should be able to understand this, because if you understand that in order to make some change in your face, maybe you want to help in the blood circulation or on your cheek area, by doing that you have to treat the chest area, which just so happens to open the lung area and will help all kinds of things that might be happening in the lung area, whether it be colds or flus or bronchial problems, asthmatic issues, and so you'll be treating many things at the same time, because it's a multi-layered thing. And so the ability to do this was put in all my books. And also I teach quite a lot, and so I have a rule that I don't just teach professionals. Anyone can come, even in the professional course. I just got a rule because it's open to everyone. It must be open to everyone. Another one of my rules is that I had to use a spoon. Now a proper like a real spoon. I think I've got nice. Oops, I got a spoon here somewhere here. Oh yeah. So a spoon, right? You might recognize this spoon as being something you might in a Chinese takeaway kind of spoon.
Yes.
So this is the spoon that if you came to me for a treatment, and and you pay the money for a treatment, you're not gonna get some jade fancy tool. You're gonna get the most basic tool that exists, because this is all what Gua Sha is. It's not the fancy tools. Those are made up.
Of
Because
course, of
it's
course,
all about
because
technique.
it's the industry loves a marketing story, you know.
Oh yes. And the Gua Sha, so remember, Gua Sha comes from the villages. Their
Yeah.
tools came from the kitchen, and so
Yeah.
they used rice bowls, and they used cups, and they used spoons, and they used all kinds of things you find in the kitchen, and that's where Gua Sha comes from. So this is what I use. This is what I teach. This is what I go all around the world, and I use this for that reason, because this is what Gua Sha is all about. That, and also the fact that. And so tomorrow I'm going to, for example, Sri Lanka, and I have projects out there. And so this is another aspect of what I want to do, is because this doesn't cost much at all. And to use the other part of the technique is to use oil. So again, it's forget about all of the expensive oils. What they used to use in China was sesame oil for many hundreds of years, and it works just fine. So basically, it was whatever oil you had in your kitchen and whatever tool you could find in your kitchen. And that works exactly the same as anything expensive.
So,
Uh,
Clive, let me ask you a question. I mean, I'm sure some of the listeners will think, well, the astrophysics of nebulas, right? This sounds complicated, and it would take me years to learn these techniques. Let's sort of give a realistic expectation of how long it will take for someone with no understanding, like no understanding of musculature, vascular systems, fascia systems, to learn enough that they will start to see some benefits from the application of the techniques.
in terms of learning.
Learning,
In
yes.
terms of yeah. So, but and again, this all comes down to like the level of learning.
Yeah.
Um, and there was research done in Vietnam, and they have their own Gua Sha there, and they were looking at, well, how much do people really understand by what they're doing? Because many people in Vietnam use a form of scraping technique, and they worked out that they just don't understand. They don't understand the theory whatsoever of what they're doing, but they
Yeah.
use it all the time very successfully. They're
Yeah.
treating colds and coughs and colds and flus, and they're treating stomach issues. They're treating headaches. They're treating all kinds of things in a kind of informal setting. And the whole idea about this is that the beauty of Gua Sha is that there are levels of understanding. So if you're treating friends and family, you don't need to understand all the great detail of it, but you do need to understand the safety aspect. But you don't need to understand the great detail of it. And so it's how far you want to go down. And so
Yeah.
you start off with the safety, and this is the treatment, and that can be done very very fast. That can be done with a very short course, so like a day course. You could just treat your friends and family because that level is really just about safety. Look, this is how you do
Yeah.
it. This is how safe it is, and this is what you might use it for in an emergency. Because I teach day courses for that kind of thing, like how to treat emergency conditions that you would find at home, with your family, and that would be a
That's
day course
amazing.
like that. But
That's
but
amazing.
more
Yeah.
detail, then of course the more time you would need it. So
Yeah.
certainly
So the techniques are relatively easy to master.
again, it's levels. So
Yeah.
there's a basic technique which is absolutely
Yeah.
fine and anyone can do it. But of course,
Yeah.
if you're going to master something, it's going to take many years actually to do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that's great. So that's exactly comports with my understanding that the basic techniques can be learned within days or weeks, and then you can enrich that over a period
Yes.
of years. So this is something that you can keep learning. And one question I have is you have students around the world. Um, and do you have a directory of your students who provide these services? So if our audience wants to see a Gua Sha person in Minnesota or,
Yeah, yeah.
France, do you keep a directory of people who are practicing?
Yes, and oops, there's a map on is Komorebi Institute, which is the institute, the name of the institute which I'm the director of, and the website for Komorebi Institute, they have the directory there, and there's a map
Oh,
at the top,
excellent.
and so you can just see whereabouts that is. So Komorebi Institute was just dedicated to gua sha, nothing else, and Komorebi is a Japanese word, and it means the light that shines through trees when the sun is at a certain way direction in the sky, and you can kind of see the kind of beams of light coming through the trees. That's what
I
Komorebi
can
means.
totally picture it. Yeah, I can totally picture it. Well, Clive, this has been the loveliest discussion I think I've ever had. And
Thank
I'm
you.
the audience really got a sense of what a wonderful person you are and how deep your integrity is, how tremendous your sense of purpose is. You're a real rarity in this world of, fame and instant success and, thousands of followers. You are really a touchstone for all of us to understand and check our own purpose. Like, are we operating with integrity? It's really, and we're gonna do more. We're gonna, originally we were gonna talk about something as trivial like Botox and filler, and we can have a short discussion about that in the future and about some other things. But I think this has been a great introduction for people to the origins of Gua Sha, the complexity, how it really it reveals an understanding of the natural world, and it's accessible to everyone. So I want to thank you very much for this wonderful time that you've spent with us. Know that you're traveling tomorrow, and exciting. Yeah, I'm glad to share this with our audience.